Nobody wanted this assignment. You could see it in the way Lieutenant Gerald Ashworth stood in the hallway outside the commander's office, jacket pressed to a crease that could split paper, cap tucked under his arm, eyes fixed on the far wall like a man reading his own obituary off the wallpaper. The commander had been clear. The tiara is to be returned to the royal vault by end of day Friday. By any means necessary. You have our full authority. Full authority. Gerald had been a royal protection officer for 19 years. He'd stood outside hospital rooms while monarchs breathed their last. He'd walked 3 steps behind grief at state funerals. He knew, better than most men alive, what full authority meant when it bumped up against a woman who'd spent 50 years learning exactly where the edges of authority ended. He folded the order into his breast pocket, pressed it flat against his chest, drove to Ray Mill House in silence. It was a Tuesday in October, which meant the light had that particular quality, thin and apologetic, that made the Wiltshire countryside look like a watercolor someone had left out in the rain. The trees along the drive had gone amber and rust. Leaves dropped without ceremony. Gerald pulled through the gate and sat for a moment with the engine idling, watching a blackbird pick at something in the gravel. The house looked quiet. That was the thing about Her Royal Highness's private residence. It always looked quiet. That was the deception. He'd been briefed, of course. The tiara, a piece of extraordinary antiquity, sapphires and old rose-cut diamonds set in silver and yellow gold, worn by the late Queen at her own coronation rehearsal in 1952, had been placed in Camilla's private care following an intimate ceremony the previous spring. A gesture, a passing of something more than jewelry. Everyone in the household had understood what it meant. Everyone, apparently, except the men now asking for it back. Gerald got out of the car. His shoes on the gravel sounded very loud. The housekeeper who answered the door was a woman named Mrs. Patricia Hollis, who had worked for the Duchess, the Queen Consort, for 11 years, and who looked at Gerald the way a cathedral looks at weather. Patient, unmoved, fully prepared to outlast whatever this was. Lieutenant Ashworth. Mrs. Hollis. I'm here on behalf of, I know why you're here. She said it without cruelty. Just fact. The way you'd say I know it's raining while standing in a doorway watching someone arrive soaked. Is Her Royal Highness. She's in the garden. A pause that carried weight. She's been expecting you. Gerald had prepared for resistance. He had not prepared for the garden. Camilla was seated at a wrought iron table near the far hedge, a cup of something steaming in front of her, a pair of reading glasses he'd never seen her wear in public perched on her nose, a book open and face down in her lap, like she'd stopped mid-sentence and simply decided the sentence could wait. She was wearing a pale blue cardigan that had seen better decades. Her hair was loose, which was, he registered this with some alarm, something he had genuinely never witnessed in a professional context. She looked up when she heard his footsteps on the stone path. She did not look surprised. She did not look welcoming. She looked like a woman who had known this moment was coming since approximately the day she'd received the tiara, and had been deciding ever since what she intended to do about it. Gerald. She said his name like she was setting it down carefully on a table between them. Ma'am. He stopped at the appropriate distance. I apologize for the intrusion. No, you don't, she said pleasantly. Sit down. He sat. A pause opened up between them, wide enough to park a car in, and neither of them rushed to fill it. A wood pigeon was making its repetitive complaint from somewhere in the hedge. The thin October light moved across the garden table. Gerald's hands rested on his knees. They sent you, she said finally, because they thought I'd find it harder to say no to someone I respect. He said nothing. Was that their logic, do you think? I wasn't privy to the decision-making process, ma'am. She looked at him over the reading glasses. Of course you weren't. She closed the book without marking her page. The tiara, she said, is upstairs. Gerald felt something loosen in his chest. The part of him that had been braced for a door slam, for solicitors, for a stiff letter citing protocols he'd never heard of, that part eased, slightly. I'm grateful, ma'am. If we could, I didn't say you could have it. The looseness closed back up. I said it was upstairs. She looked at him with something that was not quite a smile, and not quite its opposite. There's a difference, Gerald. You of all people know there's a difference. He did. God help him, he did. She poured him tea without asking whether he wanted it. He accepted it without asking whether he should. They sat in the thin autumn light while a blackbird, possibly the same one from the driveway, possibly a different one, Gerald had stopped being able to distinguish individual birds sometime around 2009, hopped along the far edge of the garden path. She gave it to me herself, Camilla said. Not defensively, not as argument, just as the plain shape of a thing that had happened. In this house. At that table, actually. She nodded at the stone table near the French doors. She poured the tea. I remember she poured too much, and neither of us mentioned it. Gerald looked at the table. He looked back at his own tea. She said. Camilla stopped. Set her cup down. Picked it up again. It doesn't matter what she said. The point is she said it here. To me. Directly. Not through a protocol, and not through a letter with 3 people's initials at the bottom of it. The wood pigeon continued its argument with no one. And now, Camilla said, 3 people's initials have sent you. Gerald had nothing to offer to that. She wasn't wrong. She was precisely, architecturally, load-bearingly correct, and they both knew it, and the knowing of it sat between them like the 3rd cup of tea neither of them had poured. Ma'am, he said, I understand this is, no. Gently. Absolutely. You understand your orders. That's different from understanding this. She stood. He stood. She was already moving toward the French doors, and he fell into step. Not quite escort, not quite pursuit, something in the corridor between, and they went inside, into the house that smelled of wood smoke and dog and cut flowers going slightly past their best, and she led him up the stairs without speaking, and he followed, because there was nothing else to do, because whatever was happening here was happening on her terms and at her pace, and Gerald Ashworth, 19 years a royal protection officer, understood at minimum this much. Some rooms you do not rush. Some staircases you climb at the speed the woman in front of you decides. The Tiara was upstairs. Whether he would leave with it was a question the afternoon had not yet answered. End of part 1. The bedroom door was open. That surprised him. He'd half expected a locked room, a deliberate obstacle, something that would require a phone call, and a solicitor, and a very uncomfortable 40 minutes in a corridor. Instead it was simply open. Late afternoon light through sheer curtains. A room that looked lived in rather than curated. A chair with a cardigan thrown over it. Books on the nightstand with their spines cracked. A dog bed in the corner, empty. The blanket still shaped like something that had recently been warm and breathing. He stopped in the doorway. She crossed to the dressing table. Gerald looked at his shoes. It felt, and he had no cleaner word for it. It felt intrusive in a way that had nothing to do with his assignment. He had been inside palaces. He had stood guard outside chambers where history was made and unmade. But there was something about this particular room, this particular afternoon, this particular woman pulling open the top drawer of her own dressing table in her own house that sat against him wrong, like witnessing something not meant to be witnessed. She lifted out a box, dark green, the color of old libraries. A simple clasp, no flourish. She held it for a moment without opening it. Just held it, both hands underneath, the way you'd carry something full of water, or something full of something else entirely. Do you have children, Gerald? The question arrived without preamble, the way she did most things. 2, ma'am. A daughter and a son. She set the box on the dressing table. Still didn't open it. My mother-in-law had grandchildren and great-grandchildren and an entire architecture of continuation. A pause. And still, at the end, there are things that only pass between 2 people. Directly. Hand to hand. Gerald said nothing. This was the correct response. I'm not a sentimental woman, she continued, and the particular flatness with which she said it confirmed that she was being precise rather than modest. I've been married to sentiment my whole adult life, and it does not agree with me. But there is a difference between sentiment and witness. Between keeping something because you want it, and keeping something because you were chosen to keep it. She looked at him in the dressing table mirror. He looked back at her reflection. She chose me, Camilla said. Simply, she chose me. 3 words without any of the weight of a lifetime behind them, except all of it. Every bit of it. The weight of 50 years of being the wrong woman in the right story, of being the scandal, and then the acceptance, and then the quiet companion at the end when companionship was the only currency that mattered. Gerald's hands were very still at his sides. He'd been briefed on the historical provenance. Sapphires from Albert's collection. Silver reworked in the 1890s. The craftsmanship, the valuation, the vault reference number. He had a document in his inside pocket with all of that information printed on official letterhead. It suddenly felt like a very stupid document. She opened the box. The tiara caught the afternoon light in a way that seemed almost inconsiderate. Too bright, too insistent on being noticed, filling the quiet room with refracted points of blue-white that moved across the ceiling like very slow snow. Gerald had seen it in photographs. He'd been trained on its provenance. He was not prepared for how old it looked. Not damaged, pristine, actually, obviously cared for, but ancient in the way that certain objects are ancient, carrying the specific gravity of every hand that has held them. Camilla looked at it for a long moment. She wore it the night before the coronation rehearsal, she said. Just here. She touched the front of her own hair, lightly, the way you'd touch a memory. In private. She said she wanted to know what it felt like without anyone watching. Gerald looked at the tiara. The tiara offered nothing back. Just light. And, now people I've never met, Camilla said, who were not in that room, who did not pour too much tea, who did not sit with her on the worst mornings of her last 2 years. Those people have sent a very decent man to my house to put it in a box and drive it to a vault. Her voice was perfectly even throughout this. Not bitter. Not theatrical. Just the facts of a thing, stated. I want you to understand something, Gerald, before this proceeds. She turned from the mirror and looked at him directly, and there was nothing in her face that required softening or interpreting. I am not defying them because I want the tiara. I'm not keeping it for vanity or sentiment or because I've lost my mind. A beat. I'm asking you to go back and tell them that there is a conversation to be had. A proper one. Between people who were present and people who have questions. Not an order. Not a lieutenant in a pressed jacket and a document in his pocket. Her eyes moved to his jacket pocket. He did not reach for the document. Can you do that? Gerald Ashworth had been a Royal Protection Officer for 19 years. He had a document with a vault reference number. He had full authority. He stood in a doorway with afternoon light, making slow snow on the ceiling. He said, I can do that, ma'am. She closed the box. Not with finality. With patience. The way you close something you expect to open again under better circumstances. She set it back in the drawer. The light on the ceiling shifted as a cloud moved, and the room went ordinary again, and Gerald became aware, in the way you become aware of something that has been true for several minutes, that his hands had been fists at his sides without his noticing. He unclenched them. Thank you for the tea, he said. A ridiculous thing to say. He knew it was ridiculous as he said it. She looked at him, and this was the thing he would think about later, in the car, on the drive back, on the call to his commander where he would use words like diplomatic complexities and recommend further consultation. She looked at him with something that might have been relief. Not victory. Not defiance. Just relief. The relief of having been heard by at least one person in an official capacity on a Tuesday in October. Close the door on your way out, she said. He did. Downstairs, Mrs. Hollis was waiting in the hall with his coat. She handed it over without expression. He put it on. The front door opened before he reached it. He stepped back into the thin Wiltshire light. The blackbird was gone. The gravel under his shoes sounded different on the way out. Quieter, maybe. Or he was listening to it differently. He sat in the car for a moment. Pulled the document from his inside pocket. Looked at the vault reference number. Folded it the other way, along an axis it hadn't been folded before, and put it back. Started the engine. End of part 2. Commander Whitfield was a man who had spent 31 years making difficult things look like paperwork. He was good at it. Gerald respected him for it. There is a particular institutional intelligence required to transform grief into protocol, defiance into diplomatic complexities requiring further consultation, a queen's private bequest into a vault reference number, and Whitfield had it in abundance. You do not last 31 years without it. He listened to Gerald's report without interrupting. This was unusual. When Gerald finished, Whitfield turned to the window. The view from his office was a courtyard, presently containing 3 pigeons and a delivery vehicle. He looked at it the way men look at things they are not actually seeing. She wouldn't give it over. She asked for a conversation, sir, at the appropriate level. She refused. She requested, Gerald said carefully, that the matter be addressed through dialogue rather than instruction. Whitfield turned back, looked at Gerald with the expression of a man who has been around long enough to know the difference between those two things, and also to know that the difference is sometimes the only thing that matters. You could have insisted. Yes, sir. Full authority was extended. Yes, sir. But you didn't. Gerald looked at the middle distance, the practiced gaze of a man who has stood in a lot of hallways. I made a judgment, sir, that insisting would create a larger problem than it solved. The tiara is secure. Her Royal Highness is cooperative in principle. The conversation she's requesting is, in my assessment, a reasonable one. Whitfield was quiet for a moment. You liked her, he said. I respect her, sir. That's what I said. The call came 4 days later. Gerald was off duty. He was standing in his kitchen watching toast burn because he'd gotten distracted reading something on his phone and forgotten about the toast, which was the sort of thing that happened to him more often than he'd like to admit. His wife, Sandra, had pointed this out several times and he had agreed with her several times, and The toast continued to burn on a semi-regular basis. His phone rang. A number he recognized. He answered it. Moved the toast. Stood at the kitchen window where the garden, his own, ordinary, suburban garden, nothing like Ray Mill House, was November bare and somehow still cheerful about it. He listened. He said, "I understand." He listened again. He said, "Yes, sir." Thursday. He hung up. Sandra looked at him from across the kitchen. She had the particular spousal ability to read a phone call from the posture of the person receiving it. "Work?" she said. "Thursday," he said. She nodded. Put the kettle on. Did not ask for details because in 19 years she'd learned that the details he could share he shared, and the ones he couldn't he carried, and the kettle was the appropriate response to both. He drove to Ray Mill House on a Thursday. Same drive. Same amberan, rust trees, slightly more stripped now, winter making its preliminary arguments. Same gravel. Same blackbird, or a convincing replacement. Mrs. Hollis answered the door. She looked at him. He said, "I'm here for a conversation, Mrs. Hollis." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile. The structural precondition for one. "She's in the garden," she said. Camilla was at the same wrought iron table. Different cardigan. This one the color of heather, older even than the blue one. The book in her lap was different. The teacup was the same, or indistinguishable. The wood pigeon was delivering its remarks to the hedge with renewed commitment. She looked up when she heard him. She looked. He would think about this word later, would turn it over, would put it down, and pick it up again. She looked tired. Not defeated. There was no defeat in her anywhere. He was fairly sure that defeat had tried Camilla and found the terrain inhospitable. But tired in the way that people are tired when they have been holding something heavy for a long time and are waiting to find out whether they can set it down. He sat down across from her without being invited. She noted this. Said nothing. "There will be a formal conversation," he said. "The relevant parties. Next week. It's been agreed." She looked at him over the reading glasses. "Agreed," she repeated, tasting the word, finding it acceptable. "They want to understand the context of the original arrangement before any decision is made about the vault." "The context," she said, "is that she gave it to me." "I know, ma'am." "Do they?" "They will," Gerald said. "That's what next week is for." She was quiet. The wood pigeon said its piece. The November garden held its ground against the gray. A leaf detached itself from the near hedge and dropped straight down, no wind to take it sideways, just straight down, and landed without drama on the stone path. "Gerald," she said. "Ma'am." "You went back and told them it wasn't simple." "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" He considered this question with the seriousness it deserved. He had a document with a vault reference number. He had full authority. He had a career built on following precise instructions in service of an institution he genuinely believed in. "Because it wasn't," he said. She poured him tea. He accepted it. They sat in the November garden while the light did its thin, apologetic work across the stone table, and neither of them spoke about tiaras or vault reference numbers or the weight of things passed hand to hand between two women in a private room. They talked about his daughter, who had just started university, about the garden, which she said was impossible this time of year, and she planted things in it anyway. About a dog she'd had that had used that empty bed in the corner upstairs for 12 years, and whose absence still caught her off guard sometimes, mornings mostly. Small things. True things. The kind of things that don't appear in reports. When he stood to leave, she stayed seated, which was protocol. You don't require a queen to rise. But she looked up at him with that same expression from 4 days ago. Not victory. Not sentiment. Just the look of a woman who had asked to be heard and had been, and knew that the hearing was not nothing. "Thursday next week," he said. "I'll be here," she said. He walked back across the garden, through the French doors, through the house with its wood smoke and its dog-shaped absence, out the front door that Mrs. Hollis held without ceremony. Gravel. Car. Engine. He drove home through the November countryside, and the thin light chased him the whole way, and he beat it to his own front door by about 4 minutes, and Sandra had the kettle on before he said a word, and the toast he made after did not burn, which felt like something, though he couldn't have said exactly what. The conversation happened the following Thursday. Gerald was not in the room. His job was to stand outside it, which he did, for 2 hours and 40 minutes, while November rain traced slow lines down the tall windows of the corridor, while his shoes remained exactly parallel on the floor, while a junior officer brought him coffee. He didn't drink. When the door opened, the tiara stayed where it was. He got this from a single glance at the faces leaving the room. He did not smile. That would have been wrong. He filed no report that used the word defiance. What had happened here was not defiance. It was a woman saying, "She gave this to me, directly. And that matters." And, eventually, haltingly, imperfectly, through the creaking machinery of institutions that were not built for directness or intimacy, they agreed that it did. The blackbird was on the front step of Gerald's house when he got home that evening, just sitting there, head tilted, looking at him with the particular blank confidence of a bird that has decided this step is its step and is prepared to debate the matter. Gerald stood on the path. The blackbird held its position. Gerald went around to the back door. Some arguments. He had learned, you don't need to win. You just need to know which ones are worth the gravel. End of part 3. Complete story.